The image of the guitar first appeared more than likely on television, you know, with performers, pop performers like Elvis Presley and the music of the Ventures and the Beach Boys and then the Beatles. So the guitar, especially the electric guitar, was sort of like a new sound in the pop world, and you know, I wanted to investigate it. I mean, it certainly was appealing to see the crowd reaction from these type of performers and what they were getting, you know, in their shows, as viewed on television. So my first touch of the instrument came at a very interesting time. My sister had a gathering at the house, my older sister, and she was 7 years older and had all of these friends over the house that brought instruments. And that was the first chance I had to pick up a Fender Stratocaster. And just the sound and the feel of it was you know, had a big effect on me as a little kid. So it was that moment that I felt as though I wanted to explore it more, and you know, I'd asked my parents for a guitar and to take some lessons. So that early period began with them purchasing maybe a $20 acoustic guitar, a piece of junk. And I started taking lessons, and it was my good fortune that I started taking lessons from a guitarist teacher who was more versed in jazz. And it wasn't by choice, of course. It was just, he was the guy teaching in the local music school. And his name was Bob Aslanian. And Bob was a very disciplined and organized teacher, very, very well versed in the standards of jazz, from the likes of the style of like Barney Kessel and Jim Hall, and you know, who else? Tal Farlow, Wes Montgomery. So anyway, although I wanted to learn more of the pop standards, it was also mixed in with his teachings of that type of music. So I had the best of both worlds in terms of theory and harmony and everything that goes with it. Scales, you know, alternate picking styles. It was just the right teacher to have at that point in history, you know. Okay, the start of my career more than likely had to do with, you know, leaving Berklee. Berklee School of Music in Boston was the first place I attended after a short stint with Barry Miles' quartet. So I went to Berklee after a short stint with him, and then went back with Barry for a short period of time. We played a number of gigs in and around the New York area. And it was through that experience of playing with Barry that in that time, that course of time, a friend of mine had recorded one of the shows. And that tape from that show wound up in Chick Corea's possession. And it was due to that, that particular performance that Chick had hired me, based on that, what he had heard from that tape. So, of course, then playing with Chick Corea and Return to Forever launched my name more on a worldwide scale, you know. I was at 19 years old. I was at Berklee School of Music, and I had gone back after playing with Barry Miles. And I got a call from Chick personally, who had heard this tape that was made. In fact, it was a New Year's Eve show that I remember we had played with Barry Miles in New Jersey. And it was a hot show. It was a really, really good performance. And it was just a good fortune of mine to have my friend seek Chick out, find him in New York, and get him this tape. And I'm sure he bothered him quite a lot to get him to listen to it. But it was just the right timing because Chick was looking for a guitar player at the time. And it was just my good fortune as well that that was my favorite group in the whole world, was Return to Forever. So it was the most challenging guitar music for electric guitarists at that point in time, because it was so much of it was composed and intricate and interesting. So it was the chance of a lifetime that was presented to me, you know. So my first performance after arriving in the New York area for this gig with Chick was at Carnegie Hall, and we had I think 3 days to rehearse the music, and it was quite challenging. I mean, I think I had at least 10 charts that were more than 6 pages long, so I had to learn most of the music. I read on stage, but still you had to learn a lot of intricacies and get to a certain comfort level within 3 days to perform in front of a sold-out crowd at Carnegie Hall. And at 19 years old, I was quite, you know, shaking, you know. It seemed like with Return to Forever that we were together for a very long time, because we made such a big impact within a 2-year period, which was the period in which I was a member of the group, because we ascended quite dramatically in those 2 years. So somewhere in that second year, we had the good fortune of recording 2 records, Romantic Warrior as a quartet with Columbia, and Land in the Midnight Sun, my first solo record. So I was in a very unique position to have been signed to 2 different contracts on the same label. And the other members had their own solo contracts with different labels. So in fact, we were the first band, I think, ever to have a group contract and individual deals as well. So that was really cool, I thought. And Land in the Midnight Sun, I just did the right thing. I think by incorporating all of my friends as part of the cast of the record. Chick Corea was on it. Jaco Pastorius was the first record he ever recorded on in his life. It was the first time in the studio for him. Anthony Jackson, Stanley Clarke played on it. Alphonse Mouzon, Lenny White, Steve Gadd. So it was the cast of the cream of the best players were on that first record. And it was the first time I got to compose, which I credit Chick Corea for a lot of that, because he really pushed me and all of us to compose our own music. I said, you know, at the time I didn't want to compose. I really liked playing his stuff. But he said that if you can improvise well, you can compose. So I took that, and of course I was very influenced by the way he composed. So that was my first entry into that world of composition. And as uncomfortable as I was with doing it, the record turned out to be the best-selling debut record for Columbia that year. And then the second record turned out to be a smash, which turned platinum, and that was Elegant Gypsy. And with that record and the writing on that record, I really had found my voice, I thought. I said, okay, now I know who I am and what I've got. I wasn't sure on the first record. Yeah. Well, I think that with players that have, and there's a lot of great players that exist in this genre of music. Sometimes the playing is better than the composition. I try to, in my career, allow the influences that I've had prior develop in the way of composition that equaled my playing, so that it wasn't just the technique or the playing style that became the focal point of my style, but it was also the ingredients of my composition that had merit, because that's what really, in my opinion, kept the attention of the listener, was the composition. Because if you have a great framework to work within, then you can say a lot of good things, but it's really the composition, what comes next in the piece, and that's going to keep your attention. Because after a while, great soloing is not going to do it. So, and that was set up by my fathers, like Chick Corea, and then later on Astor Piazzolla as I developed. It just gave me so much influence to develop my own thing, you know, and the elements of my influences of Latin music that I acquired as I was growing up outside of New York City, and going into New York City quite often, at least once or twice a week, going to the jazz clubs, going to the Fillmore East, the greatest rock venue that ever existed, and experiencing all the great bands of their time. All the Latin clubs I would go to by myself, just to absorb this tremendous sound. I didn't go to see a guitar player because they didn't exist in salsa bands, but I had a real good feel for it. And so all of these influences made its way into the way I compose, you know. And now, you know, through the years, world music became very important for me. My involvement with tango and South American influences outside of Argentina, maybe Brazil or the Middle East, all of these elements, I think, really connected to audiences and fans of the guitar, primarily even in Europe, where there was a bigger connection to tango, let's say, for instance, or Middle Eastern music, more so than the U.S. U.S. came later because they had less of that kind of exposure than Europe did. Luckily, the very early years when I was 19, 20, with Return to Forever, there was an acoustic segment that existed within the show, and also on the records. We did 3 records in that short 2-year period. So that kind of format made its way into my first 4 or 5 records for Columbia. And there was always at least 1 acoustic or 2 acoustic pieces, but the sole focus was on electric. The excitement was in the electric. And that was really my voice primarily. But then the opportunity for a collaboration of 3 guitarists, myself, McLaughlin, and DeLucia, became an opportunity that we couldn't miss. And so in 1980, we went on a tour of Europe first and then the United States. The first tour was a 2-month tour, and at the very end we recorded a show in San Francisco. In fact, it was 2 nights at the Warfield Theater, and that became later an album that is very, very well known throughout the world. It's Friday Night in San Francisco. That opened up a big door for me to do more with acoustic music, because the appreciation for acoustic music, primarily in Europe, more so than the United States. In the US, they needed more electric. But in Europe, they were just as happy, if not more happy, with acoustic music. And I think a lot of that has to do with the upbringing of a lot of Europeans, with their upbringing with classical music, and their more of an appreciation and respect for jazz than even the Americans had. There's just different means of expression. With the electric guitar, you can play more lyrically, you can sing more like a vocalist, you have more sustained capabilities, so therefore your phrasing and your expressions are going to be obviously different. With acoustic guitar, you don't have the sustained capabilities, but you have then more rhythmic possibilities. And because of the string tension being a lot stronger and harder on an acoustic, you know, I can play my rhythmic things that make its way into the music. Yeah. Well, it's going back home. It feels very comfortable to go back to the electric guitar. I hadn't realized for so many years that I had such an affinity for it until I got back to playing it, and I felt like I was home again. So to be able to play some of the older pieces is kind of fun. We're having a good time with it because the audience is really like, it's like turned up 2 or 3 notches in excitement, you know, to some degree, especially in the States, but all over too. I mean, the show is more balanced between electric, acoustic, older material, middle period, and brand new material. So it's everything. It runs the gamut within the 2 hours. So I'm quite happy with it. Of course, I have over 20 records, so it's really hard to put in all of the pieces that I would like to have played in a night, because then I would need about 5 hours to do the show. But these are the choice pieces for this particular tour that kind of highlight each period within my career, you know, focusing on both instruments. The audience really responds to the electric guitar for some reason, probably due to the fact that is how they know me. They know me from the beginning playing that instrument with those pieces that they remember. You know, it's like if it's a pop band, they remember the hit song of the pop band. You know, anything new, it's okay. But they want to see what they remember. They want to hear what they remember. You know, an aspect of that. So they're getting that. You know, and I'm having fun playing. Touring is extremely stressful. I mean, in terms of travel, especially when you go to airports. But there's a lot of fun on tour too, especially with you know, the interaction, because we all really like one another. So we're all buddies. We hang out and we joke and we laugh and all the backstage stuff. And on the bus is always a blast, and it makes touring fun. You know, we laugh a lot. You know, the Gumbi, as you know, my percussionist, has been with me for almost 18 years now. And it's just from the morning when you wake up to the end of the night where we belly laugh about all kinds of experiences. You know, and he's very close to my age, so we grew up in the same area, and we know all of the same characters on TV. You know, so if we see somebody, we'll mention somebody from TV. If he looks like, oh yeah, we crack up. So we have a really good time, you know, on the tour, every tour. Yeah, I mean, because we relate to the same period of time, the same TV shows, the same everything, and we know the same street language. So you know, there's a lot of intense joking, you know, that goes on amongst musicians, and I think musicians, you know, touring musicians have the best stories in the world. I mean, you could just mention a name, and when I could tell you a story about them that should be in a book, you know.
But not on the DVD, I assume.
Well, you have to, you have to be prepared to die.
Okay.
You know.